Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. Today we begin looking at the central nervous system and how it operates. So we'll begin with just sort of a layout of the central nervous system. Um, the central nervous system consists of your brain and spinal cord and the neurons that sort of pass information along so you can perceive what's going on, make decisions, and sort of send out instructions to the body. Now, your nervous system consists of your central nervous system, which is sort of the decision making parts, right? You send or stop signals. And then you have your peripheral nervous system, which is the PNS. And that consists of nerves that bring information in and carry instructions out. So those are all the wires that run around the body. You have both cranial and spinal nerves, so named because they either branch directly off the brain or off the spinal cord. And again, they carry sensory information in and instructions out. If we back out to the next portion here, we're going to look at the sensory component of the peripheral nervous system. You have special sense organs like the eyes, the ears. You have special senses like the sense of smell, stuff like that. And we'll get into all those. So there are these sense organs all around the body that detect changes, whether, again, it's changes in temperature, pressure, like it says there, stretch, touch, could be changes in pH of the blood, things like that. So there are organs all around the body that can detect those changes. And then that information is sent toward your peripheral nervous system through pathways that are referred to as somato or viscerosensory. Somato is, again, body, viscero meaning gut. So, again, all around the body, you have receptors that detect what's going on and send instructions to your brain and spinal cord to make decisions. Now, in terms of instructions coming out, that travels through the motor pathway. Okay, so the motor pathway carries instructions from the brain out to the body. And there are two divisions to the motor system. There is the somatic motor and then the autonomic motor. Somatic means voluntary motor control. So that is what goes to your skeletal muscles. So you have instructions coming from your brain going to your skeletal muscles, telling them when to contract. So this is sort of your conscious response. Now you also have the autonomic motor division, which is involuntary. It's not under conscious control. So that influences the contraction rate of your heart, smooth muscle, like the lining of your digestive tract, and then glands. Again, you're not consciously deciding when glands should secrete something, right? So the sensory division detects what's going on, sends information to your central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord. Their decisions are made on how to respond. And then the motor division carries instructions out, either to your skeletal muscles that you consciously control or your autonomic nervous system that influences cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and then glands. Now, the autonomic or automatic is what I think of it as. The autonomic or automatic division is split into two categories: parasympathetic or sympathetic. With sympathetic, it sounds, I don't know, like it sort of has understanding for how you're feeling, but I just think sympathetic stimulates. So the sympathetic autonomic division revs your body up. It makes your pupils dilate, increases your heart rate. It gets stress hormones secreted. It slows down digestion in your guts, stuff like that. So it gets you ready for that fight or flight. The parasympathetic division calms the body down. I just think parasympathetic is peaceful. So pupils constrict so you don't take as much light in. Blood flow increases to your guts. It slows down your heart rate and breathing. You're producing fewer stress hormones like cortisol, things like that. So again, your body can respond by either revving up and getting ready to fight or flee, or calming down. So that's sort of the basic flow of information through your nervous system. You have sense organs all over the place that are detecting what's going on. You send information to your brain and spinal cord, and decisions get made. And then instructions get sent out. Some of the instructions allow you to have conscious control over how you respond, but a lot of your response is unconscious, it's involuntary. And again, it can either rev your body up or calm your body down. So that's sort of an overview of the nervous system. Now, looking a little more closely of the cells of the nervous system, you have the neurons, which do the actual communicating, and then you have these neuroglial cells, which are the support cells that support the neurons. They're like the supporting actors that support the lead actors. So let's start with the support cells first, the neuroglia. First, you have these astrocytes. Astrocytes, aster means star, so they have all these radiations that help hold the neurons in place. So if you look here, this astrocyte in yellow connects to your blood supply and to the neuron. So it can help hold the neurons in place and act as a conduit that transfers nutrients to the neurons. So the astrocytes help hold and feed the neurons. The microglial cells can help recycle damaged parts of neurons. So they sort of clean things up and make sure that, again, any damaged structures get parts recycled. And then Schwann cells produce a fatty coating called myelin. Myelin is a sort of waxy or fatty coating on the axons of some neurons, and it helps speed the transmission of the electrical signals. It helps neurons communicate more rapidly. All right, now, of course, the neurons are the stars of the show because they are the ones that do the communicating. They both carry the electrical signal and they release the chemical signal that travels between neurons. So looking at the parts of a neuron, there is the dendrite. Dender means tree, so it's the branched part here. And that's the receiving portion of the neuron. It receives signals from other neurons, so you get all sorts of feedback, making a decision, yeah, I should send the signal on, or I shouldn't. Okay, so the dendrites receive signals from other cells. The cell body, it sort of has a lot of the organelles that we associate with sort of standard activity of cells. So a lot of the smooth ER, mitochondria, rough ER, stuff like that, that's found within the cell body. Now, the axon is this long extension here. It's like basically a long biological wire that sends electrical signals. And then in yellow here, that's the myelin coating, the little fatty coating. And what happens is the electrical signal skips between the gaps in the myelin. Those little gaps are called nodes of Ranvier. And again, the electrical signal skips along here, and it's called saltatory conduction. So the electrical signal just sort of pops down the axon, and that speeds the transmission of the signal. But neurons are really important because, again, they send the electrical signals rapidly through the body, and then they release these chemicals, neurotransmitters, that communicate with other cells. All right, looking at sort of the different types of communication that occurs within and between neurons, there is chemical and electrical communication. First, we look at chemical communication. Chemical communication is in the form of these molecules called neurotransmitters. So one cell, it's called the presynaptic cell, releases these chemicals. In these cases, are little red dots here. And these chemicals or neurotransmitters dock on receptors on the postsynaptic cell or the next cell. The connection between the neurons is called a synapse. Syn means together, so it's like the chemical connection between cells. So the presynaptic cell releases the neurotransmitter, and the postsynaptic cell receives the neurotransmitter. Now, those neurotransmitters sort of cause one of two things to happen. Either they tell the next cell, yeah, send the signal on, or they tell the next cell, don't send the signal on. So in that way, you can either increase the likelihood of getting some sort of response or decrease the likelihood of getting some sort of response. And again, if you remove the neurotransmitter, then that stops the signal. Okay. So if we sort of jump back to looking here, dendrites will have connections with all sorts of other neurons. Some neurons will tell them, hey, send the signal on. Other neurons will tell them, don't send the signal. And whatever the sort of outcome is, this neuron will either send the electrical signal on and have an action potential, or it won't send the electrical signal on and there won't be an action potential. So that's when you respond in some way or you don't respond. You perceive something or you don't perceive something. So again, that's the importance of the chemical transmission between cells. Now, with electrical communication, that happens within a neuron. That's what happens on that axon when it has that electrical signal happen. So let's sort of run through this briefly. Now, when a neuron is at rest, when it's not sending an electrical signal, it concentrates sodium on the outside of the cell and potassium on the inside of the cell. The way I remember this, I think it's salty on the outside and it's got Special K on the inside. I don't know if people eat Special K cereal anymore, but potassium is concentrated on the inside. And this happens because of a pump in the membrane. There's a pump that pumps out 3 sodium ions and brings in 2 potassium ions. So what it does, it creates a charge differential between either side of the membrane. So imagine if you're pumping out 3 positive charges, but you're only returning 2, that's like spending $3, but only depositing $2 in the bank. Eventually, your account's going to go negative, right? You're going to run out of money. Well, here, if you're pumping 3 positive charges out, but you're only bringing in 2, you're going to create a charge differential. It's going to be positive on the outside of the membrane and negative on the inside of the membrane. And that's creating a gradient. It's like damming up a river and making a lake behind the dam. That's an energy gradient, right? Or a concentration gradient. So when water flows through the dam, that can be used to create electrical energy. Well, here, when we open some gates, some protein gates, it allows the flow of ions, and that creates an electrical signal, or what's called an action potential. All right, so here is sort of an electrical graph of an action potential. Again, the neuron is negative at rest because it's got more positive ions on the outside, fewer on the inside. And then when you have an action potential, it actually becomes positive, and then it repolarizes or goes back to being negative. So here are sort of the events that happen. Remember, sodium concentrated on the outside and potassium is concentrated on the inside. So when there is a stimulus, sodium gates open, and then sodium will rush into the cell. You get your action potential. So again, sodium is rushing in, and boom, you get this electrical signal. So that's what we see in this first part of the graph here. You have your gradient, sodium's on the outside, potassium on the inside. So you open the sodium gates and sodium rushes in, and all of a sudden becomes more positive inside the cell. Well, up at the peak of the graph, this is number 2, the sodium gates close, and then the potassium gates open. And since potassium is concentrated on the inside, potassium rushes out, and when you have all those positive charges flow out, well, it becomes more negative inside the cell. Then we reach the bottom of the graph here, and that's part 3. The potassium gates close, and then you have that pump operating, and you go back to resting potential. So this is sort of the change in ions that creates the electricity that allows you to think and perceive and send instructions out to the body. So this is sort of an outline of the electrical activity that occurs. All right, and we finish with reflex arc. This is a reflex arc that is an autonomic response, but it's connected to your somatic motor division. So it sends signals to your muscles, basically. So what happens is a receptor detects a stimulus. That sends a signal through the sensory neuron toward your brain and spinal cord. Now that in your brain and spinal cord is what's called an interneuron. Inter means between. So within the brain and spinal cord, it makes a decision, fire or don't. If the instructions are there to fire, then the instructions travel out through another neuron called the motor neuron, and that goes to the effector. And again, the effector has the effect. It does something. That could be your muscles. So let's zoom in on this. So here you have the receptor. It detects a stimulus like this little tack that you didn't see and put your hand down on. So that causes an action potential. So again, like the sodium gates open, potassium gates open, you get the electrical signal. It runs to this sort of butterfly looking thing here. That's a cross section of your spinal cord. So that's like sort of looking down on a piece of your spinal cord. In white here, that is the interneuron. So if it gets a signal with neurotransmitter saying fire, 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 it will send the signal on to the motor neuron, which is black, and then that carries a signal to the sarcomeres in your muscle, telling your muscle to contract, and you pull your hand away. One thing to notice is that this interneuron bifurcates or splits. So part of the signal travels to the motor neuron saying, hey, muscles contract. And then the other part runs up to your brain. So it's like, oh man, that hurt. Shouldn't do that again. So that allows you to perceive. So the decision to make your muscles contract actually happens in your spinal cord. So it's really fast. It's reflexive. But you still have information travel to your brain so you understand that, something bad happened. All right. Well, that ends our intro to the nervous system. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day. Thank you.